that you have other plans that are coming out that are determining how we're using this. We're also dealing with high levels of unemployment, right? We're also dealing with schools that are pushing far too many students out of their classrooms, right? We have people who are trying to be innovative in these classrooms and don't have the leeway because the curriculums are very outdated, right? How many people have done with that before? Right? Right? How much of this climate justice information are you actually learning in your school? None, right? None, right? So, you know, as activists, as leaders, you know what I'm saying, as advocates, we need to find new and dynamic ways really to work on these issues. And I think that's one of the real things about this climate justice movement that makes me most excited, right? We have Plan YC 2.0 that just got released a couple weeks ago. Has anybody heard about that plan? Yeah, okay. We got the citywide waterfront development plan that got released a couple months before that. Anybody hear about that? No? Okay. Right, we got some folks who are rallying up on the east side right now, claiming to be fighting for environmental justice when all they're doing is pushing their privilege. We heard about that, right? Yeah. Right? Okay. So as we're talking about fighting climate justice, there's a lot of different things that we have to be present on, right? We need to make sure that we're not only pushing back against privilege, pushing back against people who want to be, you know, framing these issues for us, but also celebrate our resilience, right? Celebrate our culture, right? Yeah. Right? There we go. So, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, right? And I think one of the ways that I'd like to start is I'm going to introduce the speakers, but I'm going to do the introduction a little bit different, right? That's because a lot of times we hear the wisdom of a lot of people on the stage, but we don't always know what got them into this work. What is the stuff that motivates them? Because a lot of times, it's some of the similar experiences that all of you have been having, right? Right? So, to my left, we got the superstar, Eddie Bautista, the Executive Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Give us some love. To his left, I have a good friend of mine, who's the National Director of the Project Colors at Colors Restaurant. We got Juan Carlos Ruiz. Give us some love. At the end, we have my good friend and one of my teachers, Oganaya Datsun-Newman, who is the Director of Environmental Health at We Act for Environmental Justice. Show us some love, y'all. Okay. So to start off, what I'd really like is if each of you would be willing just to share, you know, how did you get into this work? You know, what got you interested in this specific piece of climate justice that you're working on now? So if we can start with Oganaya.
Hello? Okay. How is everybody doing?
Good.
That's great. So my name is Oganaya Datsun-Newman, and one thing that was really interesting that actually got me involved in this work, and I tell this story a lot, is when I was about your age, I grew up in California. Is there anyone here from California? The Bay? Ooh! Okay, sorry. So I grew up actually north of the Bay, but my aunt and my mother grew up in this community called Parchester Village, which is located in Richmond, California. And there's a huge Chevron oil refinery there, and my aunt would always kind of like take me to these rallies and different things because she was active in working with a bunch of different community-based organizations. And so what I realized sometimes is that she would go to these rallies, and even though, like some of you, she didn't completely understand the science, she would speak with such power and passion to these people that would like sit up on these high podiums. And I was able to see the fear kind of in their eyes that she created when she would talk about how me or like my cousins were impacted by this like really huge refinery. And I was like, wow, that's so awesome. She has so much power and she's not even getting the science absolutely right. And we all know that many times when you're talking to these folks, they really also are going to use kind of like scientific integrity to be able to battle your arguments, even though sometimes their scientific integrity is shot. And so when I would talk to her, I'd say, you know, Aunt Ethel, it was really interesting that you talked about those issues, but I think you need to maybe say this about the chemistry or this about the biology. And she really started to listen to me. And then what I realized is when I would go to meetings with her, I would kind of stand off on the side, hunched over, And she said, Obadiah, go talk. You explain the science. And I was like, I am literally in like the 7th grade. I should not be explaining science to anyone because sometimes I feel like I can't explain it to myself. And so after I started to see the opportunity and started to realize that there weren't many people of color that were able to like translate science for communities of color and low income, I saw it as being my own kind of personal mission to go to school, to battle through chemistry classes, to battle through biology, to punch calculus in the face, and to really figure out a way that I could work with people like you and people like my aunt to be able to translate and understand how all of these things that I was learning about in relationship to the refinery and health could be used and could be created in terms of a position of power. And there are not many people in science classes, so you can just stick with it and kind of learn, and then you can be just like these guys next to me.
Well, once upon a time, in a town in Mexico, I don't know. But I mean, being Mexican back in 1986, given the circumstances in my country, I was forced to swim to this other side. So I came to this country undocumented back in 1986 to reunite myself with my family who was already here. So the crossing kind of pushed me to ask questions in terms of how we organize ourselves as a society. How do we relate to each other? From being a Mexican, I became a Latino, a Hispanic, a term which I didn't even know of. So that's when it really began my learning in terms of coming to a sense of powerlessness, not having an identity many times, confused, but at the same time very proud, being very proud of who I am, you know, my heritage, my family. So I began the long journey in terms of, you know, we are always complaining about politicians and about the government, about systems. So I began searching for ways to live out my life, to give an answer, a creative answer to the problems of immigration, the problems of environmental justice, just the problems that I was being subjected to and I was being blamed for. From then on, at the age of 17, I began getting involved in prison, in jails, in Patterson, New Jersey. And it was at that time that people were being detained, the Muslims. Back in the days, they were being tortured with the dogs, and I don't know if some of you know what goes on in jail. But it was pretty horrific. So I began getting involved through that. I was part of a church, a Catholic church, a faith community, and because the priest didn't have the time to go to jail, I used to dress like one. I have to confess I was lying back then. That it was the only way they let me into the jail, dressed as a priest. So I used to do that for just to get in. I wasn't converting anybody, I wasn't pushing anybody. It was just basically to communicate with the inmates, the people that I knew inside, people who, you know, because they didn't have an ID on them, they were being locked up for 2-3 years. So I began to see more ahead the injustice that takes place, that there is a whole lot of people who are being excluded, who are being marginalized, who are being criminalized in our system. And I mean, it's all around us right now. We know that SB 1070 law in Arizona. We hear, how this anti-immigrant bashing, so on and so forth. So one thing led me into another. I was a Catholic priest for about 10 years. I was kicked out of my diocese for being kind of outspoken, and they didn't like that, so they excommunicated me 3 times. They took me out of my Catholic church. They exiled me for a little while. But I have always been interested in terms of the human rights, the human dignity of the person. And this has kind of led me, I was also part of Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice for a while. I was director of some community organizations in the Bronx, and I am going to the Bronx, by the way. Back to the Bronx, where
yes.
But for me, I think the real question, like nowadays, is what keeps me engaged and sustained in the struggle. And I have to say, it is you. You are the ones I have to blame. I look at you and I am reminded of a 17-year-old who came to this country, who didn't know the language, who felt confused, very much attacked, labeled as no good, as nobody. And I see you and I see how you are struggling with the same forces, and maybe even more than I was back then, because I think this is getting worse. But I do have hope because of that, because of your smiles, because of the work you do. I know closely what kind of work Shanae, Andre, I forgot your names. But I know you, I know who you are. And I have a lot of dirt on these guys here on the front row. If you want to know some stories, I can tell you. But I mean, it's because of that I keep going, that I keep being engaged in the struggle. Now I am at Colors Restaurant, and we are doing something different there. And I will let you know in a little while what we are doing.